Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we are diving deep into the architecture of aggression. We're going to decode the psychological mechanisms of the bullying cycle, and honestly, the most important part, we're learning exactly how to bypass our own mental wiring so we can step up and become empowered upstanders. We're taking a really complex, highly emotional social issue and breaking it down into clear, actionable psychology. Let's get right into it. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll define the bullying cycle, then uncover the bully's hidden motives. After that, we'll look at the devastating long-term costs, explain the bystander effect, and finally, focus heavily on becoming an effective upstander. All right, section 1, defining the bullying cycle. Let's set our clinical baseline here because, distinguishing actual bullying from normal everyday conflict is absolutely critical. So, for something to be clinically recognized as bullying, it needs 3 distinct parameters. We're talking unwanted aggression, a real or even just perceived power imbalance, and repetition over time. It's so vital to understand that this isn't just a schoolyard scuffle, right? It's not a rough sports match or a one-off disagreement. Look, when 2 people of roughly equal standing argue, there's usually a path to resolution. But throw in a power imbalance and relentless repetition, that literally strips the targeted person of their agency. It creates this profound feeling of being totally trapped, which actually triggers a chronic, ongoing stress response instead of just a temporary one. And this cycle, it extends way beyond physical fights. Physical abuse usually grabs all the headlines, sure, but verbal abuse and deliberate social exclusion are incredibly pervasive. And they do deep, deep damage. And then, well, there's cyberbullying. Digital harm has fundamentally flipped the landscape of aggression upside down. Think about it. Historically, if you were targeted at school or the office, you could eventually go home. You had a safe haven. Today, cyberbullying completely wiped out that sanctuary. The aggression literally lives in our pockets, on our screens, pinging at 2 in the morning. It turns trauma into this relentless 24/7 cycle where you literally cannot unplug from the source of the distress. Moving on to section 2, the bully's hidden motives. Now, we've got to ask a kind of uncomfortable question and look at the evolutionary psychology that's actually driving this behavior. When you look at it through the lens of evolutionary psychology, aggression is rarely just random. It's actually a deeply flawed strategy to hit short-term goals. The main motive? Usually it's about artificially jacking up social status and dominance. By pushing someone else down, the bully creates this optical illusion of superiority. They're also chasing resource control. And in social circles, resources aren't just, lunch money. We're talking about attention, alliances, influence within a peer group. Then there's in-group bonding. Sometimes a clique will target an outsider just to manufacture this fake instant sense of cohesion. Like, hey, we belong together because we aren't them. But at the absolute core of the whole shebang, it's almost always a mechanism to mask deep insecurities. Projecting all that aggressive power is really just an attempt to hide a massive fear of vulnerability. But we have to juxtapose those temporary little evolutionary wins against the massive long-term risks the bully is facing. In the moment, yeah, maybe they secure a temporary illusion of dominance or a fake sense of belonging. But the psychological research on this is honestly incredibly sobering. The underlying issue is that childhood or teen aggression makes for a terrible adult toolkit. If your go-to method for resolving conflict or asserting your value is intimidation, that is going to fail spectacularly in the real world. Relying on aggression like that is linked to a significantly higher chance of future substance abuse, criminal behavior, and a really profound inability to hold down healthy, reciprocal adult relationships later on. Which brings us to section 3, the devastating long-term costs. Let's look at how this builds into a really grave reality for literally everyone involved in the cycle. The collateral damage here is just immense. It fractures into 3 distinct pillars of trauma. For the victim, the impact is intensely physiological and psychological. They're dealing with chronically high levels of cortisol, that's the stress hormone, which essentially locks their nervous system into a permanent state of fight or flight. We're talking severe anxiety, depression, intense loneliness, and tanking academic or work performance. We just talked about the bully's trajectory into potential crime and isolation. But the third pillar? Society. It gets overlooked so often. Bystanders who just witness this stuff are left swimming in a completely toxic environment. When aggression goes unchecked, it makes everyone feel less safe. And even worse, it breeds bystander guilt. This lingering, corrosive shame you feel from watching someone suffer and knowing you did absolutely nothing to help them. And that leads perfectly into section 4, the bystander effect explained. Because this is the exact psychological trap that keeps us completely paralyzed. When we see this trauma unfolding right in front of our eyes,
and we feel that terrible internal guilt and fear bubbling up, we really have to ask ourselves, why don't we step in? Why on earth do we freeze?
Well, the answer is the bystander effect, which is fueled by something called the diffusion of responsibility. It's a fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying glitch in our human wiring. It's this phenomenon where every single person in a crowd just assumes someone else is better equipped to handle the emergency. Look at it this way. If you are the only witness to someone being harassed, your brain registers that you hold 100% of the responsibility. You're highly likely to jump in. But if there are 50 people watching, your brain does this sneaky subconscious math and hands you only 2% of the responsibility. You assume the guy next to you is older, braver, or maybe knows the victim better. The tragedy? All 50 people are doing the exact same mental math. This collective psychological paralysis creates the illusion that everyone is okay with what's happening, allowing the abuse to just continue unchecked while everyone waits for someone else to make the first move. Which brings us to our final and most important point, Section 5, Becoming an Effective Upstander. This is where we find our hidden power. It's how we transition from being passive witnesses to active protectors. And it's the absolute core of what we need to take away from this explainer today.
To become an effective upstander, we literally have to hack our own evolutionary programming. And the good news? It doesn't require you to be a superhero. It just requires applied psychology. Step 1. Recognize that diffusion of responsibility. The exact second you catch yourself freezing, thinking, oh, someone else will handle this, you have to realize that every other person in the room is trapped in that exact same thought. You have to be the one to break the spell. Step 2. Speak up instantly. You don't need to be aggressive, you don't need to escalate things. The psychological data shows that the moment even one bystander speaks up, the entire power dynamic flips. The illusion of consensus completely shatters, and the bullying usually stops within seconds. Literally just saying, hey, that's not cool, or come on, let's go, creates enough friction to completely derail the bully's momentum. And finally, step 3, establish clear boundaries and pivot your empathy. Once you interrupt the behavior, immediately ignore the bully. Shift your attention entirely to the target. Ask if they're okay, or invite them to walk away with you. By doing this, you completely neutralize the bully's primary goal, which, remember, was getting social dominance and attention. You strip away their audience and hand the power right back to the person who actually needs it.
Creating environments built on empathy and clear boundaries is the ultimate cure, because this whole architecture of aggression relies entirely on the silence of the crowd. Speaking up instantly is the mechanism that tears it all down. Now, you have the psychological toolkit to recognize your own mental paralysis and consciously step right past it. So I want to leave you with this. What role are you going to play the next time you witness a power imbalance? Will you let responsibility diffuse into the crowd, or will you choose to be the one who breaks the silence, shatters the dynamic, and brings empathy back to your community?